How's everyone doing tonight? Now that the doors are closed, hopefully it'll just kind of like, everyone will just settle in a little bit. I'll do my one last announcement. We do have some water over here, bathrooms downstairs. But welcome to one of our Red Barn events. My name is Virginia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the community programs educator here at Wenatchee River Institute. We also have our development manager, Randy, back here selling books. And we have one of our pro volunteers, Jeremy, helping us run the AV table. So people back home can watch live. And this will also be posted to YouTube afterwards. So if you're like, oh my gosh, this was the best presentation I've ever seen, you can watch it again later, don't worry. And I thought my thing was paused, but it looks like it's still going. Is it going? Whatever, we'll fix it in a sec. Anyways, is this anybody's first time attending a Red Barn event? Couple? Awesome. Welcome, thanks for being here. We do have some other exciting Red Barn events scheduled this fall, so please make sure you check those out as well. But if you don't know us, Wenatchee River Institute, we are a local nonprofit with the mission to connect people, communities, and the natural world. So we do this with our youth programs. We just finished a full summer of camps with kids going rock climbing and paddling on the river and playing games on campus. And we're getting ready for our school year full of school visits down throughout the Wenatchee Valley and bringing students up here to our field campus. Super exciting. We also have our community programs that do things like this at the Red Barn. We have our community garden. We have all sorts of workshops coming up, from photography to painting. We actually have a paint and sip tomorrow night, inspired by Lynda's book, The Trees Are Speaking. So there's still room if you want to come join us again in the barn tomorrow night. But I would like to thank our sponsors, if I can find them. Okay, press pause. Cool. So, lots of sponsors. Our sponsors for the 2025 Red Barn events are NCW Audubon Society, Sleeping Lady Mountain Resort, Ludwig's German Restaurant, Leavenworth KOA, the Obertal Inn, Rhine House, South Restaurants, Leavenworth Outdoor Center, Orion River Rafting, Icicle Brewing Company, Munchen House, Leavenworth Chamber of Commerce, and Syndicate Smith. So we definitely thank our sponsors, but we also rely on our community to help keep our programs going. So if you feel moved to donate tonight, either at our drinks table or at our welcome table, all those donations go directly back into our programming, especially with youth programs. So we thank you for that. Another aspect of WRI is our effort to connect Indigenous people to the natural world and to the rest of the community. So I would like to take a moment for our land acknowledgement. So this land acknowledgement was created alongside the Shimpish-Squashu people. We are spreading the message they wish to be spread to the public. The land that Wenatchee River Institute sits on is the ancestral homelands of the Shimpish-Squashu, or Pasquosa, or Wenatchee people. The Shimpish-Squashu, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee River and surrounding areas. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan Valleys. The culture and economy of the Shimpish-Squashu people centers on taking care of the land. They fish, hunt, gather roots and berries, basket-making materials, and medicines. The Shimpish-Squashu are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855. Language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. Many Shimpish-Squashu now live on the Colville Reservation, 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth. They were forced off their land here, and the U.S. government moved them to this reservation. The Shimpish-Squashu people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture, harvest their traditional foods and medicines, and hold their ceremonies passed down from their ancestors. Most people won't see or notice them, but they continue to be on the land they are connected to. Their traditional language is in Hamchin, an interior Salish dialect, and we would like to welcome you all by saying hello in their language, Tilhusht. We offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We stand as an ally to recognize their connection to the land and their rights to practice their culture on these sacred lands. We encourage all to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the place you now call home. The Wenatchee River Institute is committed to sharing this land acknowledgement and following up with other actions to educate and be respectful. Thank you. All right. So tonight, you may know that you are here to hear Miss Lynda V. Mapes. Lynda V. Mapes just retired from covering environmental and Indigenous issues for the Seattle Times. She is the author of 6 books, including most recently, The Trees Are Speaking, as well as Orca, Shared Waters, Shared Home, winner of the 2021 National Outdoor Book Award and the 2021 Washington State Book Award for nonfiction. Our book table will also be available after the talk if you need to go home with a book tonight. Her journalism has earned numerous awards, including the International 2019 and 2012 Kavli Gold Award for Science Journalism from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She is also an associate of the Harvard Forest of Harvard University in Petersham, Massachusetts. She was also recently a finalist, along with a team of journalists from the Seattle Times, for the 2025 Pulitzer Prize in Local Reporting. So please join me in welcoming Lynda Mapes.
Thank you, Virginia, for that lovely introduction. I appreciate that, and also for that very thorough land acknowledgement. They're not usually that good, so thank you. And I guess I would say about that the treaties are the most powerful environmental documents that this country has ever entered into. So honor the treaties. That's the most important thing we can do. And if we do that, a lot of other things will take care of themselves. So thanks for being here tonight, braving the heat, braving the smoke. It's a real pleasure to be with you. These sorts of community events are my favorite kinds of talks to do. I think you're my first audience since retirement. Yes. 27 years of reporting at the Seattle Times, but 40 years of daily newspaper reporting. So, yeah, I'm entering into a whole new phase of exploration. I just got back from the Arctic, where I'm going to be I'm writing a piece right now about the Trump administration effort to throw open the gates in the Arctic to oil and gas drilling, which would be a catastrophe for millions of migratory birds that nest there, not to mention the climate. So you can look for that in the Seattle Times Sunday magazine in a couple of weeks. But first, we're going to talk about The Trees Are Speaking. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to show you some slides and tell you a little bit about the book. I'm going to read. It is a reading, after all. How much do you want to hear read? Do you have a big appetite, small, medium? It's small, my husband says. That's Doug right there. I don't know. I think they get to pick, Doug. Anyway, I want to say at the start that this book was really a labor of love and a work of many hands. It started out very differently than it ended up. You know, reporting actually is that. You're not just checking off a list. You're being surprised. You're learning things. What you thought you were doing turns into something else entirely. Boy, was that ever true with this. This book started with a call to Jerry Franklin, the eminent forest ecologist. I was actually doing a story about Mount St. Helens. Jerry, how are you? What are you up to? Oh, I've got this idea for a book about old growth trees and what they taught me for a general audience. And I thought, 2 things. That's a great idea, and you'll never do it. Because he's busy, and he's 89. So I called him up, I don't know, a couple weeks later. I said, what do you think? We'll team up. We'll do it together. And he said, oh, that's a great idea. And then that wasn't going so well. And then about 3 weeks later, I called him again, and I said, I'll tell you what, I'll just do it. But we'll get to go out on all these trips together. He said, that's even better. You know, when you're the eminent scientist, you're just ready to shed the dew and just enjoy. So that is what we did. We spent, you know, the original concept for the book was I was going to wander the drip line of our old growth forest and do an updated book on old growth forest, because there really hadn't been one since Jerry and Ruth Kirk's book about the whole rainforest, which was done in the 90s. So it was time for another one, and I thought that was what I was going to do. But that is not what happened. So we did look at these spectacular forests together. And by the way, if you've not been to the Cedar Flats Natural Area, which is the Cedar Flats Research Natural Area, it's a Forest Service parcel outside of Cougar, Washington. We never go there, right, because it's in Southwest Washington. It's not near much public land, but it's really worth going to this particular old growth forest. Jerry calls it the finest piece of old growth in the Lowland Cascades. It's super accessible, flat, soft trails. Anybody can enjoy this. It's probably not wheelchair friendly, but anybody else can do it. And it's I mean, look, it's incredible. So we did together explore the Cedar Flats Natural Area and other old growth forests. Jerry had been teaching classes for 2 decades in these forests, and it was such a pleasure to learn from him, well, what is an old growth forest? Because he was really the one who taught us that it's a thing. It's not just a forest, it's a special kind of forest. And that these trees can only gain these special attributes with great age. And those attributes are, well, let's go back. Look at that. What lives in that, do you think? Well, probably a bear in the winter in that wonderful caved-in hidey hole. I mean, they're busted up, they're broken down, they've got these snaggletooth tops, and you know, their bark is peeling and shredding. That's habitat for everything from brown creepers to brown bears. I mean, it's just, they're kind of like people. These old trees take on the attributes of great age. And during the time of their life, from lightning strikes and wind and storms, they become very, they have incredible character, but they also gain incredible habitat. And an old growth forest is an assemblage of multiple species, multiple structural differences. It's not a dark place. It's not a dreary place. It's not only big trees. A lot of them have fallen over and created gaps where the new generation is rising. So it's a diversity of species and a diversity of structure and a complete actual understory. And you put those things together and you have this catenation of life that you will not have anywhere else. Plus, it's the species that we have here that are capable of growing to spectacular age and size. Red cedar, Sitka spruce. These can be 1,000 years old, and God's greatest hit, the Douglas fir. So, you know, exploring these places with Jerry and learning about them, including, of course, the marvelous fungi, was an absolute and total joy. And the vanilla leaf and all these beautiful understory plants that make a complete forest. Remember this word, completeness. That's what's so, did I almost say miraculous? I'll say it, miraculous about these forests. You go in there and there's nothing wrecked. It's all there, the whole suite of life. And there's just something that we feel as people when we're in a place like that. You feel nurtured, you feel safe. Whoever you thought you were lifts from you because there's this long story that's going to continue long after you're gone, that was there long before you got there. I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly soothing. I often sleep in these forests. I'll lie down and take a nap. I mean, look. It's everything, isn't it? It's the lichen, it's the bark, it's the wet, it's the smell. It's the deep quiet, these upholstered places. I can even get really excited about a lens of rain on the leaf that magnifies the leaf structure. Go on photo safari, take your notebook. So again, not dark, not a closed canopy, lots of open places. Complexity, complexity, complexity. That's what makes an old growth forest. And you only get this with great age because a forest has to be able to go through its long story uninterrupted by us. That's the key difference. The little things. Ferns, I'm a sucker for ferns. This circinate vernation that they do, the way they slowly unfurl in the spring. And honestly, the immensity, the size. This is actually at It's this down in Oregon. I spent a lot of time, I had a lot of help from a lot of scientists in this book, many of them at OSU. And I went down to the H.J. Anders Experimental Forest, which is south and east of Eugene, Oregon. Anybody can go there. You can stay there. You can go for walks in the woods. This is what you get on their old growth trail. I think it's one of the most magnificent I've ever walked. I mean, really. So this is good scale. You can really appreciate the size. What is that, as wide as a garage? I mean, it's just, you can't even believe it. And the bark on a tree like that, that's a Doug fir, of course. It could be a foot thick. So a forest like this probably hasn't burned in 500 years, and some of these trees are older than that. So, reporting this book was a joy, and this is where the book changed. I told you it's not what I thought I was going to do. So what happened was, after we wandered around Cedar Flats and loved it together on multiple occasions, Jerry said, there's something I want to show you. And I said, okay, what? And we get in the truck, we go down the road 5 miles, not far, and there's this. This is very familiar to all of us, your classic industrial clear cut on private land. And it looks like, what? It's been bombed, right? And it was terrible. There are little tiny trees struggling to live. It looked awful. And he was furious. Now, Jerry's a very elegant, soft-spoken man, but when he spoke about this, it felt like he was shouting. And so in this moment, I realized, oh, this book wasn't going to be just about the marvel of the old growth forests. It was going to be about how we lost so much of them, beginning in the East Coast, all the way across this country, and continuing in BC, where they're still chopping down 1,000-year-old trees. So I want to read to you something from the book. Sorry, Doug. I think the thing that I really honored about Jerry was his honesty about forestry and also his humility. What he learned about these forests came not from lab experiments so much, but actually just looking at the forest. In that way, it was much more like traditional ecological knowledge. And honestly, these two things are often put in opposition to one another, but done right, they're really the same thing. It's observationally based, respectful tutelage by the forest itself to an inquiring mind and heart. That's Jerry. And he could become fascinated with the most simple things, such as dead and down wood. Standing in a forest that is an old growth forest and saying, there's a lot of this stuff, it must matter. Well, that led to a whole inquiry about dead and down wood and why it matters, and the whole long story of a tree that continues to live on after it's dead. A dead tree is actually more alive than a live tree because of all the little tiny things within it, the microbes and the fungi and the bacteria, et cetera. But the other thing that I appreciated about Jerry was his honesty about where we were at in terms of that, which is called forestry, but isn't. Here's a quote from him. "We learned by looking at the old forest. That is how we were taught. And the richness and the complexity of it also taught us to be humble. It was a tremendous object lesson in humility and respect, as well as knowledge. The lessons in terms of knowledge, but also lessons in terms of you have to be pretty arrogant to just assume this is nothing more than a source of wood, and you can essentially duplicate it by planting rows of trees. We took a lot of shit from ecologists that thought this was just a hobby thing. We had a lot of negative feedback on the dead wood work, attacking it as just hobby stuff that had no relevance to science. A place like Harvard would have nothing to do with it. It wasn't the sexy sort of stuff, the hypothesis testing the academic scientists are so excited about. I was often angry at the Eastern ecological community, the ones writing all the papers, writing all the textbooks. What they were writing wasn't taking account of the forests that I was in. And I was bound and determined that one of the things I was going to do was to see those theoreticians have to take account of these forests. We established it was an important structural element in the forest. It had to do with the mortality of trees, not just leaf fall or branch fall. That means an investment of time. It's a long quote, but I used the whole thing because I thought it was really important. It tells you a lot about who he is and how he thinks and what his heart is like. I go on. This lack of respect for time is what's wrong with industrial clear cuts, Franklin found, the plantation-style forestry that robs everything the old trees had taught him was important. The herbicide that kills the young growing understory that feeds the soil. The replanting with a monoculture that will never have the complexity of structure, age, or species of a true natural forest. These conversions of natural old forests to plantations were stealing from the future. These once naturally forested sites were now croplands that could never become the old growth of tomorrow. Quote, I refer to plantations as one of forestry's great deceptions, Franklin said. We were fooled. People have to realize that all is not well. Foresters deceive themselves into thinking plantations are forests, and they are not. These are great for the stockholders, but nobody else. That was honest. I appreciated that. And, you know, that really is when I felt the book shift. And after all that time spent with Jerry and others in the Northwest, I found myself going to Maine, which is where industrial forestry really started in our country. So the book has a hinge. The first 5 chapters are set here in the Northwest and in BC. And then we go to Maine to talk about that story. You know, this is too familiar to us, but this is BC, you know? I mean, one of the things that we can take credit for in the US is back in 1994, citizens became infuriated at all the cutting of old growth and went to court and shut it down. The great Judge William Dwyer, the late great Judge William Dwyer, put an injunction on all logging on all federal lands until that could get worked out. And it did get worked out with the Northwest Forest Plan, which saved millions of acres of old growth. 24 million acres in all of old and mature forests were set aside on federal lands for preservation. Nominally for the northern spotted owl, but for a whole suite of life, including salmon. And, you know, right across the border, that didn't happen. It's the same ecosystem, same biome. All these migratory species, from orca to salmon, require these forests in the same way right across the border. This picture was taken just a few years ago by me. I was spending time up in the woods with Suzanne Simard. You may have heard of her. She wrote a beautiful book called Finding the Mother Tree that really looks into how trees are connected below the soil by mycorrhizal fungi, sharing nutrients, even a kind of information, which is really interesting. Some people criticize her for using words like mother tree, that anthropomorphizes it, makes it gooier than it needs to be. But all scientists would agree that forests are communities and they're connected. They may look like separate beings just as we do, but just like us, they actually are quite connected. And the health of a grove depends on the grove, which is another reason why if you whack everything but 5 trees, it's not going to go really well for what happens next on that land. So, you know, being with Suzanne and her field assistants for a week, it was sort of terrifying, actually, because up in BC, they're down to less than 1% of the really big white rhino old growth, the unprotected bottomlands with these massive, massive trees. That's where she and her crew is in this photo. They're testing the soil and looking at these trees to get a sense of, well, if you wanted to try to restore all these cutover lands, you have to have a good sense of what they were like before they were cut. So she's analyzing the soil, they're looking at the trees, and they're taking a lot of data. And for me, you know, to get a sense of what the soil was like in these places was fascinating. It's just chocolatey rich and soft and crumbly, and it smells so good you just want to eat it. I mean, it's been manufactured by these trees for 1,000 years in some cases. So it was a very special experience to be with them in the woods, and especially to be with Teresa Ryan, one of her main people in her lab, because she's Tsimshian, and her grandfather told her that she had to go to graduate school and become a biologist in order to protect their fish, because the understanding in their culture is that forests and fish are connected. These really are salmon forests that we live in. And that's not a woo-woo thing. It's not just an expression. It's a real thing. Like if you're up in the Adams River of BC, in a really big salmon year, the canopy is a different shade of green. It's deeper. It's darker. Scientists have documented this with photos taken from space. You can see the signature of a big salmon run from space. If you core one of those trees, you'll see the rings in the big salmon ears are fatter. They're bigger because the trees are getting all that nutrition. And what I love about this the most is that all that nutrition is mediated by wildlife. It's the bears, it's the fisher cats, it's the mink, it's the river otters dragging those salmon carcasses up onto the land, and then they decompose, and that feeds the trees. One of my very favorite scientists that I work with in this book was this great madman up in BC whose favorite thing to do was put on night vision goggles and just sit up there in the old growth forest and watch the feast, watch the bears come and drag the carcasses. And he was one of the first to really document this beautiful triangle of bears and trees and salmon. And this is this interconnection of nutrition that flows from the land to the sea and the sea to the land. And if you let it, it'll go on forever. It's a beautiful cycle of goodness and abundance. But when we were up there, you know, as I said, when you're a reporter, often things don't go like you think they're going to go. But if you're really lucky, sometimes something better than what you thought was going to happen happens. So I'm going to read to you about what happened when I very first showed up in Woss, BC, W-O-S-S, which is a logging town. It's not even a town, it's a crossroads right off that main highway that we all drive when we drive Vancouver Island. If you get off that highway, that shield of green on both sides of the road, it's a different story as soon as you turn off the highway and you see all the logging that's been going on. So I met them at a little motel where we were going to be for a week. We get in Suzanne's truck and we head out to go find the rest of her crew, Teresa and Suzanne and myself. And what I think is going to happen is we're just going to go meet her crew and we're going to go work for a little while in the woods. This is what happened instead. Here's a hint. You see the picture. Biologist Teresa Ryan has seen a lot of clear cuts and loaded logging trucks, but this trucker was hauling logs down the mountain outside the remote logging outpost of Woss, British Columbia, cut from trees so large the tractor trailer could carry only a few. It's so sad. I just feel heartbreak, like a piece of me just went down the mountain, said Ryan, whose traditional name is Samitsiak, as the logging truck roared past her. The ancestors are there. We actually used to put our people in the trees, she said, speaking of traditional burial practices of the Gitlan and Tsimshian nation. Ryan explained that her ancestors put the remains of their people in bentwood boxes and hoisted them into trees, into the life of the forest. So when she said the ancestors were in those trees, just cut from the mountain where they had lived for centuries, she meant it, literally. I had joined her and Suzanne Simard, an eminent forest ecologist and professor in the same department at UBC, in these woods for a week of field work. Ryan and Simard had gone out on this logging road to find their crew, but right now that was out the window. They had to go see the clear cut those logs had come from. Ryan jumped in Simard's battered field truck, and I squeezed into the back seat with their clipboards, batteries, and gear for sampling and measuring trees. Simard bucked the truck up steep, rugged slopes to reach the top of the cut and killed the engine. We got out, looked around at the cutover land, bare and baking in the July sun. A grapple skidder awaited the next day's haul of logs, and sawdust lay fresh over the ground. This kind of machinery is devastating to the forest floor, Simard said, eyeing the carved up ground, rutted and scraped to mineral soil. And we're left with that. There's no carbon left, it's gone, and it's never coming back. It took 12,000 years to make this, and we have lost it in a snap of a finger. The air smelled sharply of ground up fir needles. You can't stop it, these trees are already down, Ryan said, assessing the stumps, slash, and logging debris. It was coming straight at me, she said of the logging truck. All I could see was big logs. They were so huge. This cut was not exceptional. As we walked to the top of the cutover hilltop and took in the landscape around us, we saw logging roads tracing through a maimed landscape into the far distance, mangy with clear cuts so large they covered entire mountainsides. It's a tree hearse, Simard said of the logging truck as we walked back to her truck. We're down to the last drops. It's a fucking graveyard out here. These are some big trees. They were, she said, correcting herself. There's nothing we can do. I know we can't save every tree, but we have to do a better job. We're going to need wood, but it should not be the old growth. That was all cedar. It just makes me feel sick. And the fact that we've seen it day after day after day all over the country, I'm sure those trees are 1,000 years old. People grow so numb to it. We all are. Ryan gathered a scarred piece of wood from the ground as we walked back to the truck. We've got to burn this to honor the spirits, honor the ancestors, she said. As we headed down the mountain, a distant rumble filled the air. Here comes another, Simard said, yanking the wheel to pull over to get us out of the way of the log truck. After it passed, as we descended the mountain, ravens were circling and calling. Stop, Ryan said, stop right now. Simard jerked the truck to a halt, and the ravens' calls filled the still air. They're crying. Their home is being taken, said Ryan, who is of the Raven clan. Their nest trees are being destroyed. That is the mom. That is the baby. She's in shock. We just sat for a moment, quiet. Then Simard started back down the logging truck, jouncing over the ruts. It's so disrespectful to the mountain. It puts the mountain to shame. Our shame, Simard said, gathering speed past a numbered sign for the logging road. It was riddled with bullet holes. We made the long, bouncing drive down to the valley bottom, where we hoped to rendezvous with their crew in silence. So I wasn't expecting that to happen, and what a way to get to know each other very quickly. I think that one of the things I found really hopeful about being with them was all these young people out there on their bellies in the forest, digging with their hands, learning about soil. This is the next generation. These are going to be the people who rebuild these forest lands. This is Teresa Ryan. We had a long time sitting by the Seneca River together talking about the relationship between salmon and forests and how, in her culture, the signal of success is not beating extinction, it's abundance. If you're doing well as a chief managing the salmon stream in your territory, you get to put on a potlatch and invite as many people as you can possibly think of to come eat. And so this idea of abundance is what we should all be thinking about instead of just beating extinction. This terrible disappearing, this disappearing natural world is not what we want to pass on to the next generation. We want to pass on whole, intact, complete ecosystems that can take care of themselves into the far future and take care of all the other non-human beings. That's the original first people's idea of wealth. It's not cutting down the trees and sending the money to your bank in a distant place. Wealth is kept in a living ecosystem for future generations. Wealth you can eat, wealth you can wear, wealth you can build a house from. I learned a lot listening to Teresa. I spent a lot of time with Native people in BC and in Washington State talking about their original knowledge systems that were displaced with our coming. This is Ernest Alfred from the Namgis Nation. He was also a courageous fighter against fish farms in BC, which is how I first met him. I spent a lot of time in the big house up at Alert Bay, learning from elders, their songs, their dances, their traditions. It's all about a sense of reciprocity and respect with the natural world. It isn't just a place where you get commodities and make money. It's a place where you gain your teachings, your family is fed, your spirit is fed. And it was fun. These are people and cultures full of laughter and joy and sharing and feasting. To be with them and to learn from their courage. Goodness, this was a grandmother she's with the Monteguila First People, and she decided that it was time to just start taking their territory back. There's a big land back movement going on in our country and right here in Washington State and in BC. She took it upon herself to just go take back some acreage on the east side of Vancouver Island, just put up a shack with some help from students actually at UBC, started living there by herself. So whether it's just one person making a stand or the rest of us, the fact is we've all got to know that the first people of this place lived here for a very long time without ruining it. That's a bark scar on a tree, a cedar tree up on Vancouver Island, where the Nuu-chah-nulth people finally decided to just take their case to the Supreme Court of BC and say, look, we didn't fight a war with you, we didn't sign a treaty, you've got all these industrial logging companies cutting down our forests, and they sued for their right and title to basically take it back. And BC's response to that was, well, you know, this doctrine of terra nullius, there was nobody there. Well, the trees spoke in the court docket. They used the trees themselves as testimony of their presence on this land, going back 600 years, 1,000 years, 1,200 years. Those are bark scars from people taking bark for, it could have been for anything, baskets, clothing. You know, this again is this idea of use. You use a tree, but you don't kill it. And so, you know, this humility of learning from the forest, this humility of understanding that it must be the forest, the salmon that we take care of so they can take care of us, is a very different stance from simple commodification, obviously. So that's Maine. And what happened to me was being at the Harvard Forest, which is where I went to write this manuscript. I took a leave of absence from the paper and spent a year there. I was upstairs talking with Jonathan Thompson, one of the chief ecologists there, who I love. And I said, so Jonathan, where'd this idea of just like cut it all down and send it somewhere else and put the money in a bank, where'd that start? He said, oh, Maine. I thought, okay, I guess I'm going to Maine. So I did. And, you know, Maine is a different kind of forestry. They do this thing called strip cutting. And I rented a plane for this book and went flying, because it was the only way to really see the northern forest, which stretches for many thousands of acres, what it really looks like. Because from the ground, you can't tell. But when you get up in a plane, this is what it looks like mile after mile. It's just been cut to bits, because most of this is paper company land. And look how tiny the trees are. Those are about as big around as a coffee can. So what they're down to at this point is just what they call clip, chip, and ship, right? Cutting really tiny stuff, chipping it up, and making it into pulp for boxes, Amazon boxes, by the way. So this paper industry basically gutted New England. So this is the Penobscot River is where I spent most of my time. The Penobscot River is the largest river in Maine. And it, for many years, was home to the pulp and paper industry. So basically now, this is the Detroit of New England. You've got places like this, dead pulp mills from the Canadian border to the head of tide. And there's so many small towns that are struggling to start over after places like this have cut and run and left communities with these deadbeat buildings and all kinds of toxic pollution. Does it sound like Aberdeen? Does it sound like Cosmopolis? Does it sound like Forks? I mean, we've all done this, and it is the, sadly to me, what we're really seeing when we see this is this financialization of nature down to its finest expression, when basically we've destroyed the forest. We don't have even the jobs that created. The capital's now gone someplace else where they can make whatever they want to make even more cheaply at even lesser standards. So, you know, wandering around this dead paper mill while one of the environmental toxicologists for the Penobscot tribe was sampling the streams, you know, you look at this and you just think, how is anybody ever going to clean this up and start over? There's no money to pay for it. The company's long gone. And you see this in community after community. I thought, all right, let's talk about solutions. I didn't want the book to be just about doom and destruction. And so I asked the Penobscot people if I could go out and look at some of their forestry operations. You know, so I went out with the head of their forestry department and the head of their natural resources department, and this is an active cut. That looks pretty different, doesn't it? So they cut trees, but they cut them with 3 goals in mind. 1, to create jobs for their people. 2, to sell products from the forest. And 3, to basically, you know, treat the land in such a way that it will continue into future generations as a productive forest for both jobs and forest products, but also for wildlife. We saw so many animals. There were moose, there were turkey. We kept being interrupted in our conversations because they were so excited about all the animals we were seeing. But the difference here is you see all the trees that are left even after they've done their forestry. And they use temporary bridges rather than building culverts and roads. They work from some logging roads with a very long-armed machine that reaches in and takes some material and leaves the rest. So it's a much lighter touch, no clear cut bigger than 5 acres, and that would be done typically for wildlife to try to create open habitat for deer. And then the really fun thing happened when you're new in a place, which I was in the East. How do you meet people? How do you make sources? How do you go get what you need to learn? So I usually start out with universities. So I went to the University of Maine in Orono, and I said, I'm Lynda Mapes. I'm reporting a book about logging and forestry and salmon and forests. I need to go out with some commercial loggers. And they said, oh, you need to meet the logger of the year, Molly London. I thought, okay, Molly's getting a call. And to her infinite credit, Molly let me go out with her logging crew. And we spent the day together. And so what Molly is doing with her husband is this kind of regenerative forestry. And it's a completely different kind of forestry. It's very expensive. It requires a really big machine like this one. They're a young couple in logging, which is unusual. These machines are very expensive. It's a hard business to get into. It's very risky, tiny profit margins, but they're really into it. And guess who they work for? They work for the Appalachian Mountain Club, which is the oldest outdoor club in the country. And the AMC has what they call their Maine Woods Initiative. And what they are doing, I found profoundly exciting. They're buying land, and they do 3 things with it. A third of it goes into permanent conservation, no touch. Another third goes into recreation, trails, et cetera. A third of it goes into regenerative forestry, where they're basically trying to rehabilitate these paper company lands. You saw the little tiny trees. The idea is to take the little stuff and leave the larger, higher quality species to grow on and get bigger, to improve the quality of the stand over time. This is the opposite of high grading. This is the opposite of just clip, chip, and ship. And it's creating jobs for local people. So to me, this was very hopeful. The other thing that's going on, this will sound very familiar to you, is dam removal on the Penobscot River. They are taking out dams on the Penobscot to bring back sea-run fish. Yes, Atlantic salmon. And to them, getting 1,000 Atlantic salmon back on the Penobscot is a big deal. To us, that sounds pitifully small, but to them, it's a miracle. And they're getting alewife, river herring, back by the millions. And these are the ones that really do all the work of feeding the land and renewing these landscapes. And so dam removal and putting in fish passage at places like this dam, this thing, I called it the Salmonator. It's an elevator, basically, that's bringing these fish up over and above the dam. But this is a former dam site. This used to be the BZ Dam, and you can't tell it was there. And on a beautiful spring night, the dippers were flying over the water, and this gives me enormous hope. It's very much like what we're doing with the Elwha, what we're doing with the Klamath, what we did with the White Salmon River. These places, and it will never be the right answer everywhere, but where we can and where we should, taking out dams, bringing back fish, restarting this incredible engine of life so that the fish can come back and feed the forests and even feed the people eventually. That's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And to me, what was even more exciting, these are Atlantic salmon. I only ever saw them before in a can, so that was kind of exciting. Those are alewife with them. They're big, right? They're big. They're doing it. Big thing. I love going out with these guys. They're from Sea Grant, and we went out on a cruise in the spring just to watch the river come back to life. And they were using this bioscanner that basically showed you with blobs on a screen how much life there was in the river. They've been going out every year for 10 years after taking out some of these dams, and we're very encouraged at how much the river was responding. But this honestly was my favorite part. So this culvert, this will be familiar to you as well. They're tearing out deadbeat culverts in their ecosystem now that they care about sea-run fish again and getting them back into some of these forest areas for the salmon, and especially for the alewife. And so this is a new bridge. And this is built by Molly's father-in-law, who's in his 70s, and he built some of those culverts and logging roads in the first instance. Now the AMC is contracting with him to go out there and replace them. And he knows how to do this from all of his field engineering. So again, this is working with local people and the skills that they have to take new steps into a new future full of life. And he's so proud of them that he signs every single one with welding bead. So, you know, to me, that is the face of the future. This is people in local communities coming up with the solutions that are right for them, that reconnect these landscapes, forests and fish, continue to use forests, but use them in a way that's sustainable and actually keeps the wealth in the local community. Thank you. So I'm here for questions if you've got any. You can ask me anything. I'm here for you.
How much old growth is left? What percent of it?
Teeny. So in the East Coast, it's very funny you asked that question because in 2 weeks I'm going to the East Coast Old Growth Conference, which to me is like a misnomer. I mean, it's a non sequitur. There's so little left, especially in the East Coast. It's fragments, it's bits, it's parks. And out here, I hate to put out a statistic because I'll probably get it wrong. It's in the book. It's small, right? I mean, in the Northwest, is it 8%? It's tiny. I mean, it's very small. And we barely saved what we saved. And it's at risk again. The Northwest Forest Plan that I spoke of is now up for an update by the Forest Service. So hold on to your hats. And as I'm sure you're all aware, President Trump has called for increasing the cut on federal forests across the country by 25%. Where are they going to get that wood? Mostly it's going to come from here. So, you know, that's executive talk. That's just executive orders. We still have the environmental laws that we have. Let's face it, they've cut so many of the people from the Forest Service staff. I don't even know how they would get out these sales that they said they want to do. But pay attention, you know, when these sales start coming out from the local Forest Service offices, you look at those things, you know, pay attention to those things. And fortunately, here in the Northwest, we have a lot of very skilled lawyers. It's a great time to be a lawyer. You know, we're going to have to fight this stuff because otherwise we're going to lose things that we cannot lose. And look at the climate. I mean, I talked to you on a night when the air is full of smoke. I mean, the title of the book comes from talking with some of the people at OSU, including their forestry director there, who basically, in a beautiful op-ed, which our paper didn't publish, but I loved it, so I put it in the book, said, you know, the climate we've created and the forests we've created cannot coexist. And that's true. So it's not just, to me, logging almost feels quaint anymore. At least that's under our control. You know, this conflagration of fire and bugs and disease is what really is taking out entire species of trees, especially on the East Coast. Hemlock, beech, birch, ash. I mean, it's, you go into these forests, even forests that are protected, and you're in forests that are in advanced stages of decline. You don't see old beech. Of course, you don't see chestnut. But anymore, you're not even seeing eastern hemlock. You know, these are all because of invasive pests and diseases that have come in often on nursery stock. So, you know, it is this combined, it's a combination of forests of pretty much unchecked global commerce, global warming, and the trees can't run away. You know, they have to take it. So it's really up to us to take care of the forests. And you know, every tree matters. Because I live in Seattle, I very often tell people at talks, you know, go to Discovery Park, see our last old growth there, and, you know, get kids out in the woods. If you don't know your trees, learn your trees, and plant trees, and not just plant them, but take care of them. So I think that, as we all know, forests take up about a quarter of the emissions created by people in the world every single year. So they're fighting the good fight, but they can't do it alone. Yes. No, not you. You're my husband. In the back.
I'm definitely not your husband.
I can't hear you.
These projects to reestablish Atlantic salmon streams, how long has that been going on?
Oh, you'd be surprised. I was surprised.
Oh, and then what is the projection of the growth of the salmon streams and the return of the salmon?
It's long. This stuff is all very long term. I mean, they started this before we did the Elwha. So the work on the Penobscot has been going on for quite a while. And it's going to take forever. They only have about 1,000 Atlantic salmon back. The alewife are, however, doing great, which is very hopeful. Let's talk about the elwha. I mean, that was only about 10 years ago, and it's shocking to a lot of scientists how quickly it's coming back to life. And now the recovery is starting to extend to other species. I love looking at wildlife camera footage of cougars snagging coho out of the elwha. That's that circle of goodness starting up again. So, you know, it's a time in our country and in our lives when it can be easy to be discouraged, but I will say this, you know, you can count on nature. Anytime and every place that we have reconnected these systems so that they can function again, nature takes care of it, always, at every scale, every time. So you can count on nature. It's really up to us to take our foot off the neck and let nature do what nature can do best. And it, to me, is an infinite source of hope and inspiration just to watch what happens each and every time. And honestly, groups like yours that are paying attention to nature and are reaching out to local tribal communities to do that together, this is where it's going to happen. It is all about the local show at this point, right? I mean, it is totally up to us. So I think that local groups like this, caring about your place and investing in one another in your communities, this is exactly the frontline work and where it's going to happen. There's like not somebody else coming. That's not happening. Okay, yes, you're allowed.
I'm getting to the point where nothing shocks me anymore. However, you told me something the other day, which I want to know if you really meant it.
Is this about our finances?
Actually true that what's come out from the Trump administration so far would at least nominally legitimate the Forest Service cutting old growth on the I-90 corridor across the Snoqualmie Pass. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, if they actually try to do that, I would not be surprised if people didn't like lie down on the road to keep it from happening. I mean, people are not going to let that happen. They're just not. I myself am not going to let that happen. Yeah. Yes.
I don't know how to frame this question. It's just the urban sprawl that I'm seeing on the west side. I grew up on the west side. I grew up in Maple Valley, Washington. And now I'm seeing these forests just, they cease to exist. Like Bonnie Lake is just a giant parking lot.
Black Diamond?
Black Diamond.
I have been Black Diamond. Yeah. Why? And like, can we live in a better way where we're not just destroying ecosystems?
No, brother. I mean, Terry Lavender's here. I mean, she worked her whole career on setting land aside, right? Yes. I mean, we have tools. The land trusts, more counties should have the kind of tax that King County has in order to buy land for future preservation. We have tools, and we need to use them. I mean, what you point out is exactly the horror show, and we need to build better and more, and we need to set land aside. And there are tools to do this.
The state of Washington has a pretty decent growth management act, and it's been in place since 1994. And in King County, where you're talking about, we're bumping up against where the urban areas are like this, and so they want more, and they're pushing out into the rural areas. It's going to take a lot of voices to make it whole.
Yep.
But it exists. There are tools. But
It just feels like, I mean, and I'm aware of that, like growth management plan and all that, but it still feels like there's these beautiful areas, these beautiful forests, like especially thinking of Bonnie Lake, and it just,
You're not wrong. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. It hurts to look at it. And I often think about what must it feel like to the Muckleshoot people. It's like, okay, you took it all so you could do this. Good going to Puyallup people. You know, how much must that hurt? What if you came back to your house one night and it had been just, you know, leveled? You had a question.
Yeah, in this watershed we have this Forest Health Collaborative, which I think is an attempt to meet a lot of needs, including ecological needs and employment and forest health.
Great.
I was just wondering if you've looked into any of those, because there's several of them around the Northwest, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts, or if you're gonna do any follow-up.
Yeah, I love this stuff. I think it's incredibly hopeful, the community forest movement, and there are several of them, including some of the ones the tribes are doing. That's the stuff. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly where it's at. I think of forests, this will sound a little funny, but I think of them as public utilities. I mean, they're providing clean water, clean air, habitat, spiritual solace. I mean, why don't we treat these things in that way as valuable, functioning utilities that we absolutely have to have, and curate them just as we would a good water plant or a sewer plant. I mean, there was an effort back in the legislature some years ago to try to create capital funding exactly for purchases to create community forests, to treat them just like we would other kinds of capital projects. And I think innovative financing and community solutions like that are really important and very promising. More. Yeah. Honestly, the thing that nobody ever talks about is that 3/4 of the land base, forest land base, is privately held, and it's industrially managed. So if you were to look at the face of a clock where most of the timber is coming from, that's where the action is. And to actually move the needle on carbon, on habitat, on all these things we care about, something's got to change there. I mean, it can't just be about 40-year rotations and less for profit for distant investors. That's the financialization of nature in its most extreme form, and look what you got. So that's the legislature, right?
Here, I think 85% of the land in Chelan County is public.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, that's the other big difference in the East Coast. Maine has almost no public land. Almost none. And there's a weird paranoia about it. Like they think that's a bad thing. And there was for many years a trust with the landowners that, well, I can still camp there, I can still fish there, so it's all cool. Now they don't even know who owns it. And so things are starting to change there. Maybe that'll be good. It's 8 o'clock, we should call it. You've been a wonderful audience. And the books are for sale, and thank you for being here tonight to sell the books. Thank you very, very much.